Death Stranding, in Kojima's own words, is the first Strand-type game, the sequel being the second. And while the term Strand-type game has made its own jokes for years at this point, what exactly does this term even mean? What inspired the creators behind this game to come up with this unconventional mode of gameplay that seemingly frustrates the player so much that it became one of the most controversial games of the last decade? This is the Unheard secret behind Death Stranding 2 on the beach that inspired the creation of this iconic series. Kojima's games have always been about mystery, carrying forward this unconventional idea that if anyone else in the industry had tried to execute something on a similar scale, they likely wouldn't have received the same level of resources and support that Hideo did. When Death Stranding 2 was first revealed, no one knew exactly what it was. A game about just making deliveries? Wait, how does that even work? And Sony agreed to this? I mean, sure, it's still a Hideo Kojima game. I guess I'll check it out anyways. That was the reaction of majority of the audiences who saw Death Stranding for the first time. And then the game launched to insanely mixed reviews. People were largely shocked because they didn't expect it to be a game entirely about traversal. However, this is something that worked in the favor of Death Stranding 2. For once, people knew what they were getting into, and hence the overwhelmingly positive reviews for the game. Despite the fact that Death Stranding 2 makes great efforts to further cement the great concept of the first game, if you really think about it, the sequel is still about making deliveries, which is exactly what makes it so great. The first tool made by mankind was a stick, which used to keep bad things away. The second was a rope, a tool used to bring good things closer. It does not take much longer before you start to notice the inspiration behind this idea that glues Death Stranding. Kobo Abe's novel, The Rope, or rather the philosophy embedded within it. In Abe's world, objects are never just objects. A rope is not merely a tool, it's a symbol, a metaphor for attachment, desire, the compulsion to connect. Where most literature explores conflict through the metaphor of the sword, Abe flips it. His stories ask what happens when the danger isn't violence but separation, when the deepest fear is not death but disconnection. And that's exactly what Death Stranding builds itself upon. Kojima essentially asked, what if a game was built not on the combat, which are the sticks, but on the connection, which are the ropes? And that's what Death Stranding became. You connect isolated cities, you link players across worlds, you build roads, leave ladders, share signs. You deliver, not destroy. Kojima inverted the classic gameplay loop invented decades ago in hopes of creating something entirely new, in the hopes of inventing an entirely new genre of video games, the Strand-type game. He made every player a unifier rather than a warrior, reimagined what it means to interact in a virtual world, all of that in hopes of aligning the values posed by his love for literature ever since his childhood. By aligning Death Stranding with Abe's existential themes, alienation in modern societies, the loss of identity, and the quiet power of human bonds. A game that, while being very divisive at its launch, has managed to connect over 20 million porters over time. All of this brings us back to the development of the sequel, On the Beach. After the success of Death Stranding, all that Kojima Productions had to do was to listen to the fan base and improve upon the unique concept of the first game. But merely developing upon the systems of the first game was not everything that Kojima wanted. And so the entire studio looked deeper into the anxieties of a world post-2020. Into the fragmented digital age, into the emotional void left by hyperconnectivity and global isolation. On the Beach carries forward the DNA of the original Strand-type game, but the sequel also asks, What do we do once we are reconnected? What do we become? If Death Stranding was about rebuilding, On the Beach is about living with the consequences of that unity. And while the story itself is much less complicated or even impactful than the first game, On the Beach is still the most complete expression of Kojima's vision to date. The result is a game that feels cohesive. Every mechanic, every narrative beat, every player interaction feeds into the central theme. That true connection isn't forced in chaos or spectacle, but in the mundane, the difficult, and the enduring. This is the very DNA of this series. It's a shared burden, the unspoken solidarity, the decision to keep walking forward, even when no one is watching. And that's what makes On the Beach Kojima's most complete work. Not because it tries to outdo Death Stranding, but because it dares to follow through it.
You're Rainy, aren't you?
Who's asking?
Someone who's been looking for you. For you and your power.
You want my power? Why?
You're a pharmacon. Medicine that can harm. Poison that can heal. It's all in how you use it. Want to come work for me?
Not every player will connect with its quieter tone or its philosophical restraint, but for those willing to engage, it offers a rare kind of fulfillment. A feeling of having been part of something and having left something behind. Not just a sequel, not just a game, a strand tied from one soul to another, stretching quietly into the future. And all of these themes of the game forced me to ask a deeply concerning question. Kojima revealed in a very personal reflection that he fell seriously ill during the development of Death Stranding On the Beach. For a man who has so often blurred the lines between life and art, this wasn't a narrative twist. It was a frightening real-world confrontation with mortality. He admitted that during this period he truly wondered if he would live long enough to complete the game. This wasn't the dramatic flair of a game director speaking in metaphor. This was Hideo Kojima, the creator who redefined what games could be with Metal Gear Solid, who dared to invent a new genre with Death Stranding, looking directly into the unknown and asking himself, will I be able to finish telling my stories? It's a sobering moment for the entire industry and for anyone who has followed Kojima's career, because it begs a serious, unavoidable question. How many more Kojima games will we get? He is without a doubt one of the last remaining auteurs in the gaming industry, a visionary who writes, directs, produces, and shapes every detail of his work with obsessive care and emotional intent. This era may not last forever. Death Stranding 2 On the Beach may not just be the next chapter in a growing saga. It might be one of the final major works from a man who has already given us decades of groundbreaking, generation-defining games.